Okay, my name is Christian Bell. I'm from Wildcare, represent the board of Wildcare, and we're talking about the way we do conservation at a volunteer level in Tasmania on public lands. Wildcare is the main conservation partner in the management of public lands with the Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service. And to give you an example of the scale of it, I mean, about 80% of the weeding that goes on in public lands in Tasmania is undertaken by volunteers. The management agencies doesn't simply have the resource to be able to deploy in a state where half the land is public land or protected area. So we contribute an amazing amount of hours to the management of the public land estate in Tasmania. And the work that I'm going to talk about is Wildcare's work on invasive species management on islands of Tasmania. Tasmania has 400 other islands besides the main island, which most people wouldn't be aware of. And I guess it's a very interesting situation. Where we've got much of the world is bulging at the seams with a human population, and we've basically found that a lot of these offshore islands, some of which are pristine, but many have been used in the past for economic purposes, but are no longer used with regard to those things. They're things like sealing, whaling, and grazing. Grazing has often been taking place on islands because they are cheap places to, in fact, put stock. But essentially, the economic activities have declined over the years. So we've actually seen a retraction of population from a lot of these islands, and the communities that live closest to a lot of these islands have getting smaller. So we've got a legacy of land management practices that were done in the past, weeds associated with grazing animals, and a very small or absent human population base to be able to undertake or carry out the work. So I think this might be pretty similar in a lot of other sort of temperate areas in the world. I think perhaps Canada, for example, where communities are retracting, communities that used to be associated with fishing are leaving, and people are generally drifting towards metropolitan centres, and that's probably reasonably true of Tasmania, where our regions are in decline and people are moving to urban areas. So we basically are responsible for completely carrying out activities on public lands in conjunction with parks. So we're a very self-sourcing and resourcing outfit. We have about 80 to 100 volunteers, I guess, that we've utilised over the last 10 years in Tasmania for work on public lands. And a lot of those volunteers are actually often scientists or public land managers who no longer can find the time to actually do the on-the-ground work. They in fact often take time off to basically volunteer and work on the lands that they're supposed to be managing in the first place as well. So it's interesting, we've had a highly skilled workforce for which we've been able to deploy, and our volunteers are sourced from the mainland urban communities of Tasmania and from mainland Australia and from across the planet. And I think we're basically leading on what might be called adventure volunteering. And we find there's a long history of outsiders coming to Tasmania, being interested in the conservation of the place, particularly groups of people like Sydney bushwalkers, for example. There's a long history of movement in this, and basically the conservation task cannot be done in Tasmania unless people volunteer with regard to the ongoing works. We talked a lot about, I mean, there tends to be a focus with islands on introduced fauna, but of course, often the vegetation on the islands basically dictates how the fauna use the island anyway. For example, we have African boxthorn that was originally planted as a windbreak on a lot of our islands by farming interests, and it's basically taking over many of our islands in Bass Strait. And basically, when we have seabirds that might like more open islands, for example, they're basically finding that this particular plant, which once used to be planted around African villages to keep lions out, presents a bit of an obstacle for use by fauna of various descriptions. We have something like a dozen in IBAs around the islands that we're working in, and basically our management of those islands is basically returning a lot of habitat that used to be prime habitat into a more original state for which the seabirds can utilise. So we've got to be pretty self-sourcing. We work with parks, we prepare weed management plans for the islands that we're working on. We also are multifaceted volunteers who might at the same time work on historic heritage assets. A lot of these islands, for example, basically have all light stations, for example. So they offer a potential to work both on the natural heritage values and the historic heritage values. I think probably there's a bit of something similar to this going on in the islands in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, but we find our work in terms of getting and bundling all sorts of funding to do the work at the same time. Our average projects, they probably take about something in the order of 10 days. People are and have to be used to be working in quite remote locations without other support. The interesting thing we've found too in a lot of the conservation activities we were taking on Tasmanian islands or in the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area is that certainly you find nowadays that government regulations that dictate the work of staff are basically OHS conditions, overtime, a whole range of other matters mean that it's actually impossible to carry out the conservation activities utilising government staff. Really, a lot of work can only be done in a more realistic way through the delivery of volunteers and in terms of that work on the ground work. We have some incredible islands that are not as impacted on wonderful assets that are part of the World Heritage Area, such as this case, which is Matsaka Island. So we've had a team working on that island for several years now, improving seabird habitat on the island. I really recommend if you want to volunteer, volunteering on Matsaka Island. I mean, being on Matsaka Island is like spending a day, 10 days, appearing in your own David Attenborough wildlife documentary. So, and it's just a fabulous part of the world. But you can see the diversity on this island. We've got the return of southern elephant seals, for example, to this island, the first place outside Corrie Island that they're regularly breeding. There are volunteer caretaker programs. I always admire the US approach to this sometimes in terms of wildlife sanctuaries, where they've always maintained a caretaker program in terms of their most important wildlife asset areas, particularly on islands. And it really does actually produce an outcome which manages human visitation. An inhabited island quite often is a much better managed island than an uninhabited one. If it's done for a conservation purpose. I'm just getting a sense for how much time I had because I originally was told this was a speed talk, so at 5 minutes I must be getting pretty close to it.
Speed talk a couple of minutes ago.
Yes, okay. So I perhaps should sign off. If you've got any questions to ask, I've got material up here, out the back, and I'm quite happy to talk about how Wildcare approaches it and the sorts of work we're doing in Tasmania. No worries.